Where we take all those articles and notes, sometimes a whole book, and we just like boil it all down to the good stuff, just for you. Today we're going exploring Amy Tan's book, The Backyard Bird Chronicles. And honestly, this book kind of surprised me. You wouldn't really picture Amy Tan, the novelist behind the Joy Luck Club.
Yeah.
Getting all excited about birds, would you?
It is a very delightful twist. I mean, we're all so used to her, really intricate stories about family and culture. And then here she is, just captivated by these like little dramas that are unfolding in her own garden in Sausalito.
And what's even cooler is that this book, like, it wasn't planned. Tan started these chronicles as just personal journal entries and sketches. It was her way of coping with the chaos of the 2016 election and finding peace in nature. But as she dove in, something shifted. She even talks about becoming the bird, which sounds almost mystical.
It really does. But when you think about Tan's writing style, it kind of makes sense, To create these believable characters, she has to inhabit their minds, feel their emotions. And so she just applied that same empathy to the birds. And that's where the magic happens, Suddenly, she's not just watching them. She's understanding their fear, their drive to survive.
Yeah, and that connection, it really shines through in the book's structure. Each day's entry is like a little vignette capturing her observations and musings. You get a sense of the changing seasons and the challenges birds face. But it's never heavy or preachy. She finds this amazing balance between, highlighting the real threats like window strikes or diseases, and then these bursts of joy over a new discovery.
Yeah. What really strikes me is her willingness to admit that she's not an expert. She even talks about taking these nature journaling workshops to hone her skills, which is really refreshing, especially for someone so accomplished in, other areas.
Totally. It totally is. And it ties into this idea of continuous learning, which seems to be a theme throughout the book. It made me wonder, did that focus on learning? Change your perspective on writing at all? Was it liberating to approach a new subject with the beginner's mind?
That's such an interesting question. I think it really speaks to her curiosity, which is so evident in all of her writing, both fiction and nonfiction, and the way she combines, these detailed descriptions with these almost whimsical sketches. It's like, is she showing us how to see the world with fresh eyes?
Absolutely. And she doesn't shy away from the less glamorous side of nature either, like when she describes fledgling behavior, how they learn to swallow and mimic other species to find food, the crucial role of parental guidance. It's not all cute chirping and pretty feathers. There's this whole struggle for survival happening.
Yeah, and she doesn't sugarcoat it. Remember her observations of hummingbird behavior. The male hummingbirds basically become deadbeat dads after mating. And they leave the females to raise the chicks alone. And then you have this fascinating last call at the bar phenomenon where even rival males will tolerate each other because they're just so desperate to feed. Before going into torpor...
Okay, before we get too deep, into hummingbirds, we should probably mention torpor is this mini hibernation state that they go into to conserve energy. It's pretty wild. And speaking of wild, those stories about the baby crows learning to eat grit, oh my gosh, they had me cracking up. Especially that young raven who joined their class, totally out of place, but determined to fit in.
That's classic Amy Tan. Even when she's describing something that's seemingly ordinary, there's always this undercurrent of humor. And deep observation, it makes you realize how much we underestimate the complexity of bird behavior.
Before we move on to some of Tan's more surprising discoveries, I want to take a quick moment to remind you to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review if you're enjoying this deep dive. We love hearing from you. Now, where were we?
Ah, yes. The complex social lives of birds.
It's amazing how Tan manages to weave those complex behaviors into these heartwarming narratives like the story about the great horned owl. That settled in her yard, I have to admit. I was a little skeptical at first. It felt a little too perfect, like something out of a children's book.
I get that. But wasn't it fascinating how the owl's presence practically eliminated the rat population in her garden? It's like nature provided this elegant solution to a problem that humans often struggle with.
You're right. That part was pretty impressive. And her descriptions of the mother owl's dedication to her owlets, their unique calls and hoots. It did pull at the heartstrings. I think what threw me off was her initial focus on the owl as this majestic creature. But as she observed them more closely, she saw their vulnerabilities too. That shift in perspective is so key, isn't it? It's easy to romanticize nature, especially when you're starting out as a bird watcher. But Can doesn't shy away from those missier aspects.
Exactly. And that's what makes her observations so compelling. She's not just presenting this sanitized version of nature, you know. She's showing us the good, the bad, and the sometimes. Downright strange.
Like those rare bird sightings she documented, finding an American tree sparrow or a yellow-throated warbler in her backyard. I mean, those are birds that are typically miles away from their usual habitats. I would have been freaking out if I saw that.
It really highlights the importance of careful observation, even in your own backyard. You never know what might turn up. And it also speaks to Tan's emphasis on using resources, like the Merlin app, to help with identification, but always double-checking with your own knowledge.
That's such a valuable point. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a potential sighting, but it's important to be sure before you start shouting from the rooftops.
Absolutely. And Tan's approach to identification really reflects her broader approach to learning in general, you know? It's about being curious, asking questions, and not being afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah. It's like she's saying, don't just take someone else's word for it. Get out there and experience it for yourself. And speaking of experience, her artistic process plays a huge role in her observations. Even though she's not a formally trained artist, she honed her skills through those nature journaling workshops.
Right, and those sketches, they aren't just pretty pictures, they're integral to her understanding of bird behavior. By focusing on the intricate details, the subtle variations in plumage, the unique postures, she's able to really see the individual birds.
Yeah, it's like she's teaching us to slow down, pay attention, and appreciate the beauty that's often hidden in plain sight. Which makes me wonder, did this heightened awareness of her surroundings, this attention to detail, did it carry over into her other writing at all?
That's a great question. I'm curious to see if her future novels reflect his new perspective. She's mentioned feeling compelled to weave birds into her narratives, even though it wasn't something she initially planned.
I'm so intrigued by that. It's like the birds unlocks this whole new dimension in her creativity.
And it speaks to the power of passion projects, you know, something that started as a personal escape, has the potential to transform her entire body of work.
You know, speaking of transformations, we've come a long way in this deep dive. Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast for more insightful explorations just like this. And if you're enjoying our deep dive into the Backyard Bird Chronicles, be sure to leave us a review. It helps others find the show and join the conversation. Now, back to Amy Tan and her feathered friends.
It's fascinating how something as simple as, like, you know, watching birds in her backyard led to such a profound shift in her creative vision.
It really makes you think about, like, where inspiration can come from, right? I mean, these chronicles were never intended to be a book. It was just her personal sanctuary, this raw collection of thoughts and sketches.
Yeah, and yet her editor saw something special in them, something that resonated beyond the personal. It's a good reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories come from the things that we create just for ourselves.
I love that. And it seems like readers have really responded to that authenticity. Tan has even mentioned that. Some people were drawn to her novels after reading the Backyard Bird Chronicles, which to me speaks volumes about the connections that she's able to make, regardless of the subject matter.
There's definitely a through line in her work, this ability to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, whether she's writing about family dynamics or cultural identity, or the intricate lives of birds. There's always this underlying sense of wonder and empathy.
Yeah, it's like, she's inviting us to see the world through her eyes, to appreciate those small details that we might otherwise miss. And that attention to detail, that willingness to really see her subjects, I wonder if that was amplified by her experience with birding.
I think it's safe to say that birding has become more than just a hobby for her. It's a way of life. It's a lens through which she views the world. And now that she's feeling compelled to include birds in her future novels, I'm so curious to see how that manifests. Will it be subtle hints, symbolic representations, or full-blown avian characters?
Oh, the possibilities are endless. And it makes me appreciate Tan even more.
Yeah.
You know, this willingness to embrace new passions and let them shape her art.
It's a reminder that creative growth doesn't have to be linear. Sometimes it takes a detour, an unexpected encounter, to unlock a whole new dimension in our work.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Backyard Bird Chronicles, I encourage you to think about your own experience with nature. What have you observed that surprised you? What lessons has the natural world taught you? And if you're looking for a dose of inspiration, a reminder to slow down and appreciate the beauty around you, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Tan's book. You can find a link in the episode description.
It's been such a pleasure exploring this unexpected and utterly charming book with you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into Amy Tan's world of backyard birding. And until next time, keep those eyes peeled for the wonders all around you. Happy birding.
And don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast for more deep dives into fascinating books. We'd also love for you to leave a review if you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening.